Well guys, the last thing in the world I needed was another project to get involved in, especially since I've got so many things in unfinished state. I got the parts on order for that Ariens zero turn. Got to get the mount on the tower of power repaired so we can put it on the boat. But my youngest son, Marc, has been bugging me for a while about this tractor, which was sitting out there in the weeds next to the woodshed for several years now. This is a Ariens GT17 garden tractor, and I actually, quite a few years ago, before I got into YouTubing, doing YouTube videos, I rebuilt the motor on this tractor. This motor is a Kohler KT17 Series 2. Now, the KT17 Kohlers got a real bad rap over the years because the early series of this motor did not have pressurized lubrication. And what would happen is, you often heard stories of people who had run the tractor for years and found it very dependable and never had a problem. And then you'd hear stories about people who had these engines blow on them, the original series. The reason is, or the theory was, that since they're not full pressure lubrication, if you're running them on pretty level lots when you're mowing, it's not really a big deal. The problem is when you're mowing on a hill, you run the risk of starving the bearings on one side, which would cause the engine to tend to seize up and or throw a rod through the block. So this is a twin cylinder, by the way. So Kohler ended up coming out with the Series 2, which basically, in the Series 2, they added full pressure lubrication to this engine. This engine has an oil pump and will pump oil to the bearings no matter if you're on level ground or a hill. So that was a major improvement of this engine, and that's why this is actually a good engine. This engine does still have a points condenser ignition. There's actually a cover right here, and underneath this cover is a conventional points, and right there is the condenser and a conventional ignition coil, kind of like the Harley-Davidson Sportster coil. They basically just, it fires, doesn't matter which side's on compression stroke, on power stroke, it fires both cylinders at the same time. 2 times in the 4 cycles they see spark. It's not a big deal. So anyways, this engine was replaced by the Kohler Magnum 18, or the M18. I don't know if they really changed the displacement much at all to get to the 18 horsepower. Chances are they just made some other improvements and were able to get the horsepower to come up a little bit, so they could call it an 18. The Magnum 18 had a couple other improvements. Namely, I think they went to an electronic ignition where you actually had a trigger coil on the flywheel and an electronic igniter. So that was a nice improvement. But this is actually a pretty good engine. So when I rebuilt this engine, I was able to put pistons from the Kohler M18, the Magnum engine. They fit perfect in this engine. So I was able to do that. I also put in the valve stem seals, and I ended up lapping the intake valves. And after doing all that, I rebuilt the carburetor, and it was a good running engine for the most part. The carburetor, I had a problem with the carburetor where I had to readjust it a lot. The air-fuel mixture would fall out of whack, and I actually think that was literally, I think the screw, the air-fuel mixture screw was worn, and I didn't have a good stout spring in there. But this tractor ended up serving us well. I did do some mowing with it. The mower deck has some other issues. But namely, I used this to pull our wood wagon And I also used it when the kids were younger. I used to pull them on a sled in the wintertime. You know, it doesn't go very fast, but when the kids were young, they thought it was great. I might even have some classic video of that somewhere I might be able to splice in here. But eventually we got the ATVs, and once we got the ATVs, the first ATV was the 1997, I think, Arctic Cat Bearcat. That was a really good ATV, full-time four-wheel drive. So this kind of didn't really have any use for us any longer. So it ended up getting parked out back there, and it's been sitting there for years. So the battery is junk. We're probably gonna have to do something about some of the wiring. I don't know where the key is. I had put a brand new seat on this not long before we parked it, and unfortunately chipmunks or something, mice, got to it, ate a hole in the seat. It was really filthy. Marc's been working on washing it some. I aired up the tires yesterday. These are also almost brand new Carlisle tires I put in the front not long before we parked it, and they're holding air now, so that's good. One of the rear tires has a slow leak, and I think I noticed that before I parked it, so might be, yeah, this one here is softening up again, so we got a slow leak in there, but it's not worth the effort of putting a new tire on there, or even putting a tube in it. For the amount of air that leaks, you could just, Marc, you could just keep putting air in the tank. Yeah. I had put all new fuel lines in, flushed the whole fuel system, the fuel pump. I think I rebuilt the fuel pump on this thing. And unfortunately, we're gonna have to do that again. This has completely failed. This is one of those, had the plastic lens on the top here with the needle. It told you how much fuel was in there. It's supposed to have a float. Oh, I can't even get it out, look at that. But that's just been letting water go into the fuel tank for years, melting snow and all that, rain. This is acts as a funnel and just lets it go right in there, so that's gonna have to be all taken out. The good news is on this model, this is a plastic tank, so we don't have to worry about the tank having rotted out or a bunch of rust inside the tank. We can literally just rinse that tank out and get a new one of these and put that tank right back in service. We'll probably have to replace the fuel lines again since it's been several years. I'm sure the ignition's probably not going to give us any spark. And I don't even remember why, but I've got these wires right here. There was something, I think I had a problem where the hour meter would run constantly even with the ignition off and kill the battery. So I think I ended up figuring out that I spliced these wires in somewhere and figured out that if I just disconnected these wires when I'm not using it, it solved that problem. So this is just a quick walk around. Just wanted to talk about it, and we're in the process of trying to take the seat off. The tracks are kind of seized. I had to bash on them with a hammer to get the seat to move forward so we can expose. What they do is they use carriage bolts from the top to go down through the rails, and this carriage bolt backed out, so when we were turning the nut on the other side to take the seat off, 3 out of 4 came off, but this one just kept turning because it's out of position. So we're just going to get back into position, get it to drop back down its square hole, and then we should be able to get that nut off. Then we'll get the seat off, and Marc can finish cleaning this whole top. I think you can even still get these lenses, believe it or not. So the GT17 was a real popular tractor. These tractors, still see them come up for sale occasionally. The irony is they made quite a few attachments for these tractors, and the attachments are sought after by people who have these tractors. So the price on the attachments oftentimes rivals the price on a used running tractor. I mean, if you don't have a mower deck and it's just the tractor sitting, you can get these for next to nothing. But then if you've got a good two-stage snowblower, I think was one of the options they had. This has front and rear PTO. The front PTO is right there. The rear PTO is in a box in pieces down in the basement, because when I bought this tractor, the rear bearing that sits in this housing that I removed here was completely trashed. So the whole PTO assembly was just slamming around in there and making a horrible noise. So I took the whole assembly out and I didn't have any use for a rear PTO. The rear PTO on this would have been used for a rototiller attachment that they had for these. I think that's the only attachment I've ever seen for these GT17s that'd be a reason to have the rear PTO. The front PTO, the shaft is double-sided, so the front PTO can be used to run a snowblower off the front, but it also runs the solid drive shaft for the mower deck. So that's actually a pretty nice setup. And then there's belts under those guards there, probably what's left of them. Here we go. This right here, the Kohler Twin 17 cast iron bores. So could be a good running little tractor if it's not too far gone. So all right, we're going to conclude this video right here, and we'll pick this up when this is in much better shape.